Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. My name is Ellen. So for today's tutorial, we're going to talk about water control while painting wet on wet and wet on dry, this wonderful autumn wildflower field. I go over this step by step. We're using masking fluid, we're scraping, we're putting in color, washing in color, tapping in color. All the techniques for watercolor and water control are in this tutorial. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comment section. There's no need for any kind of trace, but I did have a small traceable for Patreon members. If you wanted to download that, you can use that for just the white blooms. But other than that, I think you guys could figure this out. Like I said, if you have any questions, leave them in the comment section. If you're not a Patreon member, maybe consider joining. I have exclusive tutorials that are not on YouTube much longer with reference photos and detailed sketches. I also have a Patreon Facebook group where we have weekly challenges and monthly giveaways. Patrons get first dibs on my watercolor workshops and retreats. I will be launching one soon, actually. And for the top tier patrons, we get a live stream once a month where you can ask questions, and I go over all kinds of stuff that are never in any of these other things. So it's a great little thing. It's just a place people can go and support my channel, which I really, really, really appreciate. And you can check out that link in the description box below. Just click on the words "show more" and you'll see it. But without further ado, let's get started on this wonderful wet on wet landscape and learning techniques about water control. We're just going to go over some supplies real quick. I'm using an arch block. This is a 7 by 10 inch block. I've already just squiggled out some little small blooms here with some stems, and I've used this PBO masking fluid on them. So just use a crappy brush, not a nice brush. And just draw out some little stems like this and little doodads. Like I said, Patreon members can have this little traceable. It's not necessary, but if they wanted it, it's there. And you just do that and let that dry. Don't mess with it until you can't even start to paint until it's dry. And now we're just going to play with wet on wet techniques. And, then we'll remove the masking fluid and we'll reveal the white kind of tones of these flowers, but then we're going to kind of fill it in with color. So this is just really a exercise in water control and knowing when to make it thick or thin, the consistency of the paint. So right now we're going to take some ultramarine blue and see how very loose and wet that is, almost like see-through. This is tea consistency without any milk. Think of the actual product tea. Now we could start to wet our paper first, or you could do wet on dry. It's either or. I could do wet on dry here. When you do wet on wet, it just kind of just bleeds and blends a little more. This is wet on dry. A block is great if you're doing a lot of wet kind of techniques because it's not going to buckle unless you stretch your paper. So I'm just kind of go up here a little bit. We have a little Paynes gray in here. Make them a little bit more gray sky for a fall kind of color. Paynes gray is kind of like a blackish gray, but you mix it with the blue, it's really pretty. You kind of lift your paper. If it's not super wet, it will move a little bit. It won't move a lot. Another thing is ultramarine blue with burnt sienna make a nice gray as well. That it's a little damp, so it's going to move a little bit. Got a nice dark gray sky. And now we're going to play with fall colors kind of happening all around here. Oranges and yellows. So I've got cadmium yellow deep, cadmium red light, yellow deep. Mixing all these colors. Got burnt umber, burnt sienna. There's the burnt umber. Just even mixing with the blue is like a nice tone. Just mix up everything that's on your palette. And we can mix some greens in there. So I'm going to start with this. This is a cadmium yellow deep with a little bit of that cadmium red light. Again, just kind of going back here a little bit. If it bleeds, don't worry about it. You can start to play with adding a little brown. Just tippy tap. Now this is wet on dry. I'm going to keep pulling it downward. Gonna add some yellow in here, even more brighter yellow. It's fall. Think of fall colors, right? So the consistency is tea here, right here. See how very wet that is? When you're adding more paint to it, you're making the consistency thicker. So now we get like some coffee. It's a little thicker. It's not as loose. Even thicker still, I'm adding some burnt umber in here. It would be cream. See, a little thicker cream. And even thicker would turn into butter, which is basically right out of the tube. Gonna add a little Prussian blue and start to get a little green happening in here. So right now I'm kind of going horizontally. We're gonna start to go vertical. Gonna grab some of these orangey red colors. And I'm gonna start to the energy gonna go like this a little bit. I'm going to go back and forth between horizontal and vertical. I can add a little green. I can make a little bright chartreuse kind of green. See, I'm just tippy tapping back and forth. The consistency is a little thick, it's not thin. And I'll get some more. There's another color here called Sienna. Where is it? I'm sorry. I have raw oak, yellow ochre. Raw Sienna. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, here is raw Sienna. It's a kind of pretty color. So there's little colors in here. Even get some brown in here. You see, we just did painted horizontal. Now we're going vertical. Get some more of this orange tone happening. Even brighter if you want to even put something really bright like this brilliant orange. We're going to use that kind of towards the end with thick butter paint to make flowers on here. So the paint consistency now again is going to, this is like a cream consistency. See how it doesn't really move as much? It's kind of thicker. Add more water, you're getting coffee and then tea. See? And it becomes so, tea is the where you get the colors to become really light. But obviously it's really loose, and it can become puddle here. So this is where the paper towel comes in. You tap it, and then it's not so watery. You have more control. All right, I'm gonna go back up and down here. I'm gonna start to add some green tones. It's a Prussian blue and yellow. Now I like Prussian blue a lot. It's a staining color. What's a staining color? It's a color that is really intense and it holds on the paper and has intensity, but sometimes it's not so great when you're doing like glazing. So I mix a bunch of different colors that are stain colors, luminous colors, all that good stuff, sedentary colors. And we'll talk about that in another video going forward. I know someone of my patrons was asking about it today, and I said, oh, I should do a video on that. So I'll be doing that soon. Okay, I'm messing up my yellows, but I'm adding in some greens and some darker greens. You see how intense, and it actually, what about these staining colors is that they actually really hold the paper well. They really give some really intensity. So there's greens happening in here. You can make some lighter, thicker green, adding that yellow, but minimal water. So chartreuse kind of happening in here. It's getting like these little nice little streaks because I want it to look like a field, right? Very wet, damp. Just kind of throwing in some color here, leaving some white. And we've got white back here. We can throw in some of that yellow or even some orange. Start to throw in a little bit of brown, deeper green, kind of way back here. It's a field. It could be trees back here too, if you want to play around with that. Is the cadmium midnight. Could be like a tree back here. Still very wet, and just kind of tapping with my I'm sorry, I didn't even tell you that I'm using a Princeton number 12 brush. I always have everything in my description box below, so just click the words show more and it will drop down and you'll see. So now the paint is getting a little thicker again. I'm adding more yellow to this. I can kind of swoop up with the brush again, the field. Just this light tapping kind of motion on the paper while it's damp. And we can add in like another tree. See, I'm just kind of tapping, leaving some space in between. Maybe it needs to be a little bit brighter. Or it could be a little bit lighter. I'm going to add a little yellow. And you can bleed in some lovely reds, oranges on the side. Look at our tree. And we can do like little ones here. Just see it's very damp and just tippy tapping. They're not supposed to be like real perfect trees. You just get the indication that they're trees. Hanging off in the distance. I'll grab some Paynes gray and some burnt umber. And I'll put some darker tones. Again, it's very, this consistency right now is like milk. And get cream, we add more pigment. It's getting less and less movement here. Again, more and more pigment, less and less movement. And if it's still too wet on your brush, you tap it on the paper towel. I'm gonna go add some darker tones here. Kind of in a vertical. And kind of tap up. Some browns. You get this and see how it's moving like this. Now I feel like this kind of just all looks like one little line. We'll kind of fix that in a second. But I'm taking the browns now and kind of going up here. I'm going to add some more Paynes gray. It's really thick now. Swoop. See, now it's drying down here, so you can kind of play a little more. It won't move. When it's also thicker with this butter kind of consistency and it's very damp, it will soften the movement, the mark that you did, but it won't bleed it out. If it's really wet on wet, it's going to bleed it out. It's going to have like this. The thicker the paint, the less movement when it's wet on wet. See, now it's really not moving at all. You might want to grab a tinier brush to make really tiny little marks, but this works really nicely. And I'm just going to do some filler in here. Also, while it's still damp, a little thick color. Again, like butter. You can just kind of tap and make blooms. It's a little too wet. I did a little trial here. I'm going to get a little thicker. The paint. So I'm kind of holding the brush on its side, making kind of like a poppy. Now if I can grab the yellow and make it really thick, kind of orange color. And do the same thing. I've left some white here, so we can play around with this while it's still damp. Just put in like these little blooms and the red, little tiny ones towards the back, because they will get smaller perspective towards the back. I have some white spots in here that haven't been painted in. I'll fill that in with some color. Get the green. Blend up some brown. Thick paint. If I start to do little branches with this, you can kind of see them soften. Right? And I'm going to do a nice brown. I'm still using the 12. You can get little skinny lines with the 12. It can happen. So I'm going to make some nice light green again. The consistency is very tea here. I don't want it to be tea, so I'm kind of moving the paint off the palette. So we'll grab some more yellow right out of the tube. Really thick, see, it's not even moving. A little bit of Prussian blue, and now we have a nice, really bright chartreuse green. I might grab a smaller brush, either my 8 long round. I have another new 4. Get this a little bit wet so I can move the paint. And we can start to play with adding in that. Look at that beautiful, even if it's wet still here, some of this is dried, and you can have this nice chartreuse green. Putting in some of the stems in here. We can do the same thing with the darker green too, but the chartreuse is pretty. Also, it's damp. If you want to do a credit card scrape to get some nice little lines as well, make sure it's not really shiny, it's just damp. And then you'll have the white streak. See? But if it's shiny, it will just fold back into itself. It has to be damp. And if it's too dry, it won't do it either. That big one. Some of that went back into each other. All right. I'm just going to fill up these little white spaces with some darker green. I've mixed up some Prussian blue, burnt umber, and some yellow. And it makes a nice deep green. Get down here. Just kind of fill in some areas that you want to be dark green. And I'm going to go back in again. So you really want it to look like a wild field with some orange. And then we're just going to let this dry, and we're going to peel up our masking fluid and see what it reveals. So I'm just going to go in here and fill in these other ones with some bright yellow and oranges. These little white spots down here. Really come through. Bright yellow is great. Just go right over that. It'll shine through really nicely. And like I said, while it's still damp, if you want to put in some nice oranges and reds, like literally right out of the tube. Could put some oranges down here. We'll have a beautiful fall field landscape. Go right in here. I'm just tapping in some reds. Way back here. And you can tap some nice pretty yellows too. The reds are pretty orangey color, because it'll give me much smaller on the back. And even some brown. Get really creative with this. You could do a little splatter too. I might do a little brown splatter. Don't go up to the top. Get a couple of this other color. See, it's still damp. It's going to do this nice thing. Okay, so now we're done with that. We're going to let it dry, and we're going to come back and finish up our little beautiful landscape. Okay, now that it's dry, you take our rubber cement pickup. I have this in my Amazon shop. And you can clean up all the lovely masking fluid that we had. It's much easier than trying to use tape. Let's see what we got here. It's really sticking, this one. Come on. Gotta use some elbow grease. Get all the masking fluid that you put down. This one really wants to stick. And I don't know why. Okay. Anything else I revealed? Squeaky. And then you have your white blooms, which are nice and pretty. And then we're going to tame those down a little bit because that's just too intense, right? So I'm going to grab my number 4. And I'll just grab some nice gray. So I can use ultramarine blue and burnt sienna. Make a nice gray. This consistency, again, is tea. But I'll tap it on my paper towel. And I'll just kind of like lightly go around some of the blooms. You don't want it too bright. gonna fill this in. You want them like really light, but not super light. So you see I'm kind of going around from the bottom. I'll get a little bit darker maybe in the bottom. And the stems, I'm going to put in a nice green. And you could paint, that's the beautiful thing about using masking fluid for the stems, is that I'm going to make this a little bit darker on some of them. You can start off making it light green, like this really light chartreusey kind of green. And you can paint right over it. If you wanted it lighter, when you're painting all the dark stuff in the background, it's not going to happen. Or you can make it tan. But now you can just go right over that line with a nice bright green. If there's a dark color behind it, it's going to show up now. Or even a nice light tan would be pretty. But the green was nice too, because it's kind of like, we're not, you know, if you were not full into autumn and you want to just have those kind of bright colors too. So here I'll take some of the raw sienna and just go right over that lovely little branch you see here. It's nice and light, peeks right through. Right over here. You can just go really quickly right over it, all of the section. So it kind of blends nicely. You don't even need this really small brush, but if you wanted just to paint in the little areas. And leave some white. Like, you know, the light has shone through some of these areas. And now you have the skinny brush. You can take some nice beige tones or browns. Get some really nice, pretty, we can make some little wheat stems, nice little branches, some berries, whatever you want to put there in your picture. And then for the center, I can just throw in like a little Paynes gray, maybe like a little poppy, see, a little dot. They're like little white poppies. If they're too white, you can just go back in and add a little more color, like a little more beige. But I thought they were really cute. So that's that. This is the many steps you take to make a nice wild watercolor autumn kind of field. A lot of techniques showing you about the water control. That's the most important, you know, and leaving space for these little guys. If you don't have masking fluid, you're going to have to paint around it, so it's a little more difficult. They're really inexpensive. You can get it on Amazon for like $4 or $5. See, I'm adding a little more depth into some of these. And like I said, you can take some of the nice thick paint from your tube and you can paint some nice little blooms here. Go back and add, now that it's dry, some nice little orangey or yellow kind of blooms. Play around with it. And even like down here, thick paint, you can add some nice yellow. Get really thick, kind of going across. So it's really kind of just this wildflower field gone awry. Having fun. Really, really, really simple, but just simple techniques. You just break it down that way. So I hope this was informative. I hope you had a good time watching it and learned something. And leave the comment below if this is something you love to do, this wet on wet and learning how to do all these techniques. Love to hear from you. So take care, have a fantastic weekend, and I'll speak to you soon.